views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Good evening and welcome to Bronxtalk. We have concluded our debate series, and the current political season will conclude with Tuesday's primary day. That doesn't mean there aren't ongoing issues that need attention, and tonight we'll bring in a Bronx Assemblyman who does not have a challenge in this year's primary. He's been a frequent guest on the program, which we are happy about. And so we will talk with Assemblyman Louis Sepulveda about a wide range of issues tonight, including politics, the primary day election, and a myriad of subjects, including UPK, crime and policing, and more. The phones are open, so if you want to join us with a question or comment, please do so, 718-960-7241, or you can email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org, and we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. For the here and now, it is Assemblyman Louis Sepulveda in the 87th Assembly District. It includes the Central Bronx neighborhoods of Parkchester, Castle Hill, West Farms, and others. Welcome back to Bronxtalk.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to be here.
Always great to have you. You have been an enthusiastic guest, and we talked about it even before we started the show. What are your thoughts on the no-shows that we've had in debates this season? Should candidates feel obligated to debate?
Well, Gary, I think my experiences in the show has been a positive experience. You ask the tough questions, which you're supposed to do, as long as they're relevant, to the election, as long as they're relevant to you as an elected official. And I personally don't understand why elected officials or candidates won't show up to the show and do debates. I've always encouraged my friends, my colleagues to come on the show, even those that complain about certain issues. But I said,
and about me,
and about you, yeah. Every now and then they complain about you, and I tell them, look, that's par for the course. You have to go on there and let people hear your positions.
Mm-hmm. One of the candidates is Fernando Cabrera, who you supported. Now, he was one of those who had an empty seat. I certainly would rather he have been here.
Yes.
Do you have a sense of why he didn't? Or would that make you say, as somebody who supports him, that maybe I wouldn't want to support him because, as you said, it's the right thing for him to do to be here?
Well, there are many issues that I'm in sync with Councilman Cabrera. That's why I'm supporting him. I think he's an excellent candidate. I think that he is, when you look at his overall record, I think he's a far superior candidate to Gustavo Rivera. I don't believe that not being a no-show on a debate is the sole reason why you shouldn't support someone. Again, I would encourage him and encourage him to come on the show. For whatever reason, he didn't. But that doesn't detract from the fact that I believe he's the better candidate.
And we should mention, and you and I were laughing about it, you did have an unfortunate experience in a debate, but
yes.
It was a number of years ago, and I know that you've learned from it, and in that way it was an educational moment for you ultimately as an elected official.
The way you learn about these things, about appearing in these shows, is by putting your foot to the fire and making mistakes and learning and coming on again and learning.
Let's go back to Councilman Cabrera.
Yes.
There's a video on the web of him lauding the Uganda government and its anti-gay marriage stance and hailing this government that has Christians assuming the nation's decision-making. That was what he called it. It's a place where homosexuals are jailed. Does that make you say, you know what? And there are a lot of people who have been very upset about those comments, that maybe this is somebody we should not support.
Well, I mean, in the interest of information, that law is no longer on the books in Uganda. But let me tell you something. I am 1,000-fold in favor of same-sex marriage. That wasn't always my position. After I got elected, I had a conversation with my brother, who was a gay man. We had many conversations about it, and I had a change of heart. He talked to me in a way that only a brother can, and I changed my position. And so I hope that in my discussions with Councilman Cabrera that I can change his position on gay marriage. That's what I intend to do and talk to him. But understand something, that that district is not a one-issue district. There are many problems in that district. We're talking about poverty, high unemployment, The educational scores in that district are terrible. And so I believe that what he's done, he's worked really hard over the last 8 or 9 years to improve that, including he's brought over $40 million to that district. And so when you look at the overall analysis, when you look at the overall quality of the candidate, again, I'll tell you that I believe that Fernando Cabrera is a better candidate than Gustavo Rivera.
You know, we should mention, because people could turn on the show anytime during the week. I mean, the election, we do it live Monday night. The election is going to be Tuesday, so obviously time will tell exactly what happens, and people may be watching it and saying, well, he either won or lost. So, you know, we can leave the happenstance of the election. My interest tonight certainly is the issues. Maybe the most competitive race in the Bronx is the 34th senatorial district between Oliver Capel and Jeff Klein. You've been an enthusiastic supporter of Senator Klein. Let me ask you this from a governing point of view, from your position as an assemblyman. If the IDC is going to be caucusing with Democrats, what is the value of the IDC for you in the Assembly and your Bronx constituents? Wouldn't you be better off if they're just Democratic senators, giving a majority to Democrats? What does the IDC scenario do? Why do we need it, or why would you want to see it in place?
Well, it's not necessarily that I want to see the IDC in place. I have a district also that has many social problems. Again, we have very low graduation rates. We have high crime rates in some parts of my district. We have seniors that can't afford to live in their apartments. So when I look at candidates, you mentioned I enthusiastically supported Jeff Klein, it's not necessarily enthusiastic supporting him, but I look at their record and I look at what they've accomplished. And Jeff Klein has been very good to my community. We share about 13 or 14 what they call EDs. Whenever I've asked for his help, he's helped me. Whenever I've asked him to help me pass legislation in the Senate, he's helped me. When you look at his record, he's creating jobs here with a program called Bronx Jobs, Bronx Hire. He drafted one of the most comprehensive gun control laws in the state. He was helpful in passing same-sex marriage. He was one of the driving forces to secure over $300 million for universal pre-K. You look at the EPIC Medicaid program, something that is helping so many seniors be able to afford prescription medicine. That is a record of accomplishment. Not to mention, look, I had a situation in my district where a 3-year-old boy was shot at a playground. A portion of the district that he doesn't represent. But we needed to pass a bill that increased the penalties of people who discharge their firearms in playgrounds or in school areas. I asked Jeff, while we were in Albany, I said, I need your help with this. Can you help us? And he helped me draft a bill that increases those penalties. He took action right away. That has been my experience with Jeff Klein, and that is why I'm supporting him.
So for you, the notion of the IDC and whether they caucus with Republicans or now with Democrats, in a way you're laying that aside and saying, I evaluate this elected official as being the kind of elected official I want to associate with and can help me do what I need to do.
Look, Gary, you know...
So I'm explaining your position correctly.
Absolutely. I believe, and you know, my reputation in this county is that I'm extremely independent. And the reason I'm independent is because I look at the individual's record. I don't look at necessarily party politics. If, for example, a Democratic county organization is supporting a candidate that I support, then it's fine. But if I don't believe that that's the best candidate, if I don't believe that that candidate has the record to do the kind of job that's necessary in a particular district, then I won't endorse that candidate.
We talked before the show about your independence, and you have supported candidates. You supported Mayor de Blasio, and essentially every other elected official in the Bronx supported Bill Thompson. Has that been a difficult thing for you to do? I mean, to stand up and still get support from your colleagues in a highly charged political situation? Well,
I mean, to say that it hasn't created some problems would be dishonest. Of course it's created problems, but I know no other way. We have a very strong organization in our district, and by that I mean because people see what we do, the work that we do. We're out there helping everybody in the community, our seniors, our children. So I can take those independent positions because that's the right thing to do. If it were to cost me an election because of the position that I take, because I'm supporting someone who is, I believe, a better candidate, then so be it. But that's just my makeup. I'm independent because I believe in doing what's right.
Before we get off the notion of politics, Mark from Pelham Parkway is calling, and I'm just assuming that's what he wants to talk about. So we'll talk to Mark before we get into some of the other issues that we have. Mark, are you with us? How are you?
Hey, Gary. How's it going?
Fine.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
How are you?
Okay, good. I have a question. It seems like every politician who's running is bragging about they have the toughest gun law. New York State passed the toughest gun law. So I'm a little confused. Up in Montreal, they've had 16 homicides for the whole year. Here in New York, you've had about 16 homicides a weekend, and children are still being shot. So if you have a toughest gun law, it almost seems like an idiom. We have a toughest gun law, but people are still getting shot by guns. So my question to you, Assemblyman, is, and I propose this to Jeff Klein, is how come New York State hasn't passed the microchip gun law dating back to the 2002 Safe Streets and Safe Children's Act?
Well, Mark,
And when I asked Jeff Klein about that, he looked like a doe in headlights. He didn't even know about it. Yet New Jersey came very close, and they came two votes shy in May of passing the law, which would make every state within 30 months pass a microchip law, which means nobody could ever take a gun from somebody else and use it unless they're thoroughly checked and reprogrammed.
Mark, in all the years you've been calling the show, that was one of the most cogent questions you've asked. So we'll throw it to the Assembly.
Well, Mark, I don't have my, I'm not a deer in the headlights, and I understand the question very well. Look, you have to look at the culture of guns in this country. You can't compare the gun culture here with Canada. It's a whole different ballgame. You have a very strong gun lobby in this country that you have to contend with that you don't have in Canada. Now, these things, gun control, are going to take steps. I think the microchip program is an excellent program. It will be an excellent piece of legislation, but you have to deal with the realities. Will a bill like that pass in the Assembly and the Senate? It will certainly get out in the Assembly, but you still have a very tight race in the Senate. We're not sure if the Democrats are going to take over the Senate. But the Republicans would never allow a microchip law to pass. So we have to take this in increments. And I think the SAFE Act was the first step in a series of steps that have to take so that we can have the kind of protection and the kind of gun control that is necessary in this country.
Do you think something like that could be on the table in this next session or the next 2 years and actually get through? Well, I assume you would like to see a Democratic majority put something like that.
Well, I mean, there's already discussions about that, and of course I would. Look, I live in a district where there have been many shootings, children getting shot, and there's nothing more that I'd like to have something like that. But we have to deal with the realities today. People have to understand what we as elected officials have to deal with when we go to Albany, at least statewide elected officials. We can propose all kinds of legislation, but we have to get out of one body, which is the Assembly, and then have it pass in the Senate, and then have the governor sign it. And so, we can't do it all at one time. Even though it's a great idea, you still have to deal with the political realities.
Let's talk to Bob, this time from the Bronx News. He changes his locale depending on what he's got in his pocket. So, hi, Bob. How are you?
Hey, Gary. It's politics tonight.
All right. Well, only for one more question because I want to get into some issues. But go ahead.
The Bronx County organization, people are saying to me that it's weak, that the chairman has lost the mayor's race, picking the wrong candidate. He picked the wrong candidate in the speaker's race. He's on a roll like the Yankees going downhill, it seems. What would it take in this election for some of the people to rise up against him? I mean, who would have to lose? Because he's endorsed all the incumbents, and in the 2 open seats, he's made his pick early.
All right. This is probably a good person to ask because you've just touted yourself as an independent on some level. Thanks, Bob.
Well, I mean, look, if you're talking about procedurally speaking, you have to have a certain number of district leaders, I believe it's 14, in order to defeat the current county leader. But, that's not something that I'm interested in right now. I'm interested in being the best assemblyman I can be in the 87th Assembly District. And, come tomorrow's election, you can see the lay of the land and whether or not the county leader is in trouble, whether he's going to be able to garner votes. But, again, I'm focusing right now on being the best assemblyman in the 87th.
And let's address some of those things. One of the things you have championed after the mayoral election has been the implementation of the effort to increase UPK throughout the city. You put it out on your own materials. You're certainly encouraging people in your a district to be involved. The city controller said it hadn't received all the necessary contracts for UPK. At that time, when he had put out that report, it was like 141 out of the 500 or 511, I think, that he wanted. In general, though, has the effort to do UPK on a larger scale grown faster than the city of New York is able to keep up with?
Oh, I think when you consider over 50,000 children getting UPK now, the effort that it took, because remember that we had a legislative session that was contentious about giving the budget, giving the monies to fund UPK. When you consider the time frame that the mayor had, I think he's done an extraordinary job to put 50,000 seats, put 50,000 children in UPK, and to increase it next year by 20,000. And we have a responsibility this year to secure the funding for next year, because we have to do this almost every year. But you look, only 9 schools didn't open for UPK. Most of the centers that were inspected by the fire department were approved, by the social service agencies were approved, by the agents that are responsible for making sure that our children are in safe environments were approved. And so you have to laud the mayor. He's done an extraordinary effort. And I believe that UPK is going to be something that we consider along the lines of Social Security for the United States. You're going to have children now that are going to be reading by the time they are 4 years old. And when you look at the empirical data in this country, kids that read at that point go on to graduate at a much higher rate, go on to get college degrees, and so that nothing but positive things are going to come from it. And I believe this will be a signature program for the mayor that we'll talk about in the next 20 years.
You know, I hadn't planned to go in this direction, but because we could get into the value of reading before the age of 3 or 4. Many people believe that that kind of pressure on a youngster doesn't help free their mind, let them development educationally and creatively, that maybe we're better off backing off things like reading and math and doing much more constructive things like supervised play and guided play, and with less pressure for a youngster in kindergarten or earlier.
Well, I mean, you look at the curriculum. I
like the idea, sure, we all want kids to read and we all want them to do well, but maybe developmentally asking them to read by the age of 3 or 4 may not be the best thing.
Well, look, Gary, there are people that are much more qualified than I am to discuss that particular issue. I believe that kids that read early, are going to do much better in life, and that's proven by the data. You know, I have a son that's almost 3 years old, and he's almost reading now, and there's not much pressure that we've put on him, but you'll see, I believe that because he's almost at that stage where he's reading, it's only going to help him in the future. The same thing going to happen with these kids. I don't believe, when they're designing this curriculum, I don't believe they're doing it to put undue pressure on children. I think it's a well thought of plan, and it's going to be very effective.
Let's go to the telephone. I didn't get where Emily was from, but Emily is on the phone. Hello, Emily. Nice to have you on Bronxtalk from West Farms. That is the district. So there you go. Hi, Emily.
Hi, this is Emily. I'm from West Farms.
Right.
Assemblyman, have you done any laws that help the people in West Farms?
Okay, let's talk about West Farms.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
I've done many laws to help the people. A lot of anti-crime laws, anti-gang bills that I've proposed, especially with Senator Klein. I have, in 2 years in session, I've proposed nearly 50 pieces of legislation. I don't know of very many assembly people who have done that.
What has gotten through? Listen, people could propose all kinds of things. Let's answer Emily with something concrete that she can say, wow, my assemblyman has done this.
Well, remember, we still have to get most of our stuff out of the Senate. I think Luisito's law will become a law next year.
Which is?
That's a law that increases the penalties for kids that have been that are injured by gun violence. Someone who discharges their weapon by a playground or a school. That, I believe, will be a law next year. I also believe we have a very comprehensive anti-gang bill that covers many aspects of gang intimidation and gang violence, which I know will be a law next year. But let me make clear something else, something very important, because I have something called an ACE program, where there are 3 components of getting economic development, which I'm always talking about. One is you have to have affordable housing. You have to decrease the education gap, and you have to have a significant drop in crime. And what I've done is I've been fortunate that the Assembly has given me a $1.5 million grant that I can use for capital monies, and I have put my money where my mouth is. I am devoting $500,000 of that money for police, New York NYPD cameras throughout the district. I've asked the commanding officers of the 48th precinct, the 43rd precinct, to give me their 10 hotspots. so that we can then put cameras. And if you look at the evidence, wherever you have police cameras, crime drops by at least 20 to 25%. That's what I'm doing.
You mentioned crime and policing. How effective right now is the broken window theory that focuses on low-level crime to stop the bigger crime in this day and age? You know, the Giuliani years, it was credited with lowering crime, or at least in part in those days. For example, did it contribute to Eric Garner's death? Some people are saying, you know what, that was not a good thing.
Well, I mean, that was an unfortunate situation by, I believe, an overzealous police officer. It's too early to tell whether the new broken windows policy is working. We have to give it a little bit more time. Let's see what the data is telling us, and then we can do an evaluation of whether we have to tweak it. I think in the overall analysis, it will be effective.
Has the back off of stop and frisk contributed to increased gun use?
I don't believe so. Look, when the whole discussion about stop and frisk was a hot topic, especially during the mayor's election, I spoke to many police officers, sergeants, commanding officers, who told me that stop and frisk had nothing to do with lowering crime. Absolutely nothing. They believe that they were compelled through CompStat to engage in these kinds of arrests, that if you look at the numbers, I think less than 3 or 4% of these arrests led to any kind of significant drop in crime. And it was unduly targeting communities of color. Because, you know, the same similar crimes are happening in other neighborhoods, more affluent neighborhoods, and those kids are not getting arrested for the same thing. They're not getting stop and frisk. So it was a divisive program. It was destructive to our community, and it was not good for community relationships with the police officers.
Your office is on Westchester Avenue.
Correct.
There's so much talk in the Bronx about the new malls that are coming up. Are you concerned that the new malls will affect the business districts like the one and the business owners that are literally next door to your office?
Well, listen, I always look to strike a balance. When you look at a lot of the development that's going on, and the investments coming on, even housing developments that are coming up, affordable housing, when I speak to HPD and people and the agencies that are going to fund these programs, I ask them, what kind of program do you have beyond funding? How is it going to impact the community? How is it going to impact the small business people that have been here all these years? Do you have a plan to make sure that they are on equal footing with these big malls, these big box stores? I want to make sure that the small business owner can survive. Are we providing funding? I've asked for loans and things of that nature for these communities that are impacted, have been traditionally ignored, to provide loans for these business people. When they're building affordable housing, I've asked, create an area where you have commercial spaces so people who have these small businesses can possibly move to these new spaces and continue to work.
Are you concerned right now? Are business owners saying to you, you know what, Assemblyman, you got the new mall. There's one obviously not too far away in Throgs Neck, and obviously in the North Bronx there are 2 malls on Broadway, and obviously Bay Plaza is going to be a huge success, it certainly appears. Are you concerned for those stores?
Oh, absolutely. You have to strike a balance. People who stood in our neighborhoods when others left, they should be rewarded. And so, again, that's why we work with certain entities that fund small businesses. We teach them about getting financing from banks. We teach them about even simple things like maintaining proper business records, so we can help them so they can be competitive and continue to work and strive in our community.
We've got about 30 seconds left. In the next session, after the next 2 years before we go through the next cycle, well, what's legislation that you think is going to happen that the people in your district in the state of New York are going to say, that was a good session?
You mean the ones that are passed now or in the future?
No, ones that we're going to see happen in the next 2 years.
I think one of the most impressive ones is going to be mayoral control, continued mayoral control of the schools, with a little tweaking so that you have more parental involvement. Again, Gary, I'm a big proponent of education, and so I want to make sure that if the mayor has these ambitious plans, the mayorship's foot should be held to the fire. But we have to have parental involvement, because no amount of reform is going to work unless parents are involved.
I'll just add my comment and commentary in that. One of the reasons parents aren't involved, because they think it has no effect. So you can have parental involvement, but of course if it has no effect, they're not going to keep coming back.
But you have to create an environment where they feel that they are involved.
That's what we want. Assemblyman,
Right.
Thank you so much. Assemblyman Louis Sepulveda in the 87th Assembly District. If you're watching Monday night, please, I know you agree with me, whoever you're going to vote for, go out and vote.
Absolutely.
For.
Vote Vote.
And we'll see you around the Bronx, I'm sure. Folks, we did receive a couple of comments about our debate that we ran for the 79th Assembly District. This came from Reverend Bruce C. Rivera. Said only 3 of the 6 candidates had the wherewithal to show up. The others feel the community doesn't matter and are arrogant enough to believe they'll get elected anyway. Sleep on the people if you want. I expect the community to send a message loud and clear on primary day. And that came via Facebook. Also, Gene D. wrote a Facebook message, said that was such a refreshing debate. No insults. Candidates complimenting and agreeing with each other on certain topics. No one blowing out the other's candle to make sure theirs shines brighter. Very nice to see. Thank you to Gene D. and to Reverend Rivera. And if you have further questions or comments on anything you heard on tonight's show or anything going on in the Bronx, then email them to us at bronxtalk@bronxnet.org. And as we just did, we'll read them on the air during a future edition of our program. Our archives are at bronxnet.org. You'll find Bronx Talk on the lower right navigation bar. You'll find us on Facebook as well. Next week, in recognition of Climate Week and the People's Climate March in New York, we will talk climate change in the Bronx, a vital topic for every one of us. Thanks to producer Dalia Gonzalez, director Shirley Arietta. We'll see you next week. Good night.
If you drive buzzed, it could cost you around $10,000. You'll face major legal fees, major fines, and steep insurance penalties. You could lose everything. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
Jimmy can't sing,
and Tommy can't dance.
so we're gonna put some ants in their pants. Aww.
Kids will spend 22 minutes watching us, the super duper party troopers, sing about ants in their pants.
Isn't that funny? Ants in their pants, they got ants in their pants, they got ants in their pants.
Brushing for 2 minutes now can save your child from severe tooth pain later. 2 minutes, twice a day. They have the time.
Kids will spend 15 minutes watching online videos like this one.
Brushing for 2 minutes now can save your child from severe tooth pain later. 2 minutes, twice a day. They have the time.
Mom, can we get some ice cream? Please, Mom, please.
No, we're having dinner soon.
Please.
You don't have to be perfect to be a perfect parent. There are thousands of children